When I boarded the small bush plane that morning, I thought I was signing up for the adventure of a lifetime. I'd been saving for months to see the real Alaska, not the tourist cruises or crowded lodges, but the untouched wilderness. Mountains rising like jagged teeth, endless forests, and ice fields that seemed eternal. The pilot, a grizzled man named Pete, had given me a smirk when I told him I wanted to spend a week alone in the wild. People go missing out there, he said, his voice low and gravelly. Some folks don't want to be found. I thought he was just trying to spook me. I laughed nervously and brushed it off. But when he dropped me on the frozen edge of a remote valley and his plane disappeared into the gray sky, the silence that felt was unlike anything I'd ever known. Day one, the cold sank into my bones immediately. Even layered in woolen down, it was as though Alaska herself pressed against me, testing me, asking if I was strong enough. My camp was set near the tree-line, with a river half-frozen nearby. The water was fresh, and I had enough supplies to last a week. That night, as I cooked a small meal over my stove, I heard it, a sound that didn't belong. At first, I thought it was wind threading through the branches, but the longer I listened, the more it sounded like humming, low and broken, as if carried from far away. I turned off the stove and stood still, every muscle taut. The sound stopped. I slept poorly, waking every hour to the groaning of trees and distant cracks of ice. Day two, tracks appeared around my camp. I noticed them just after dawn, large, oval-shaped impressions in the snow. At first, I thought they were wolf prints, but they were too wide, too heavy. No claws at the end, just blunt, flat depressions. I followed them for a short while, against my better judgment, but the trail wound into the forest and vanished among the drifts. The strange humming returned that night. This time it was closer. It rose and fell in uneven tones, like a chant, but garbled, something that should have been words but wasn't. I sat in my tent, clutching my hunting knife, whispering to myself that it was only the wind. Day three, the river had changed. When I went to refill my water, I noticed shapes beneath the thin ice. They weren't fish. They looked like hands, pale, long-fingered hands, pressed against the underside of the ice as though someone had drowned beneath it. I staggered back, heart hammering, and when I blinked, the shapes were gone, just clear ice and dark water moving slowly beneath. I almost packed up right then. Almost. But the nearest settlement was over 60 miles away. With no radio and only Pete scheduled to pick me up at the end of the week, I felt trapped. That night, I woke to the sound of something brushing against my tent. A dragging noise, like wet cloth sliding along canvas. I held my breath, too terrified to move. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Day four. Snow fell heavy all morning, blotting out the mountains. My camp felt smaller, more suffocating under the white silence. I decided to explore a bit, to clear my head. I moved through the woods, the snow crunching beneath my boots, when I stumbled on something that nearly stopped my heart. A cabin, old, leaning, and half swallowed by the forest. It hadn't seen human life in decades. Its roof sagged and the wood was gray with rot, but it stood there hidden, waiting. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and something sour. Animal bones littered the corners, strung together with crude twine. Symbols, circles, jagged lines were carved into the walls. And on the far side of the cabin, covering the back wall entirely, was a mural. It showed the valley I was camping in, the river, the forest, but the sky was black, painted with streaks of crimson, and standing in the trees were figures, tall, faceless, with hands too long and bodies too thin. I left the cabin shaking, my breath fogging violently in the air. Day 5. I didn't sleep. The humming had turned into voices, clearer now, layered, dozens of them rising and falling just beyond the tree line. They never came closer, but they surrounded the camp, circling. I could hear footsteps crunching faintly in the snow, but when I tore open my tent flap, nothing was there. At dawn, I saw them. Not fully, just glimpses between the trees. Tall, gray figures slipping behind trunks, moving unnaturally, too smooth, too quiet. Their faces, or the lack of them, were blurred like smudges against reality. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion, isolation, hallucination, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Day 6. They wanted me to see. I found the prints again, circling my camp. Only this time, there were dozens, so many that the snow was torn and churned. I followed them, against all sanity, back toward the cabin. But the cabin wasn't there anymore. I retraced my steps a dozen times, swore I'd been in the right place, but where the cabin had stood was only forest and snow. No sign of disturbed earth, no foundation, nothing. That night, the voices grew louder. They weren't outside the camp anymore. They were inside my head, whispering broken syllables, nonsense words that somehow carried meaning. Join us. Cold is forever. The river waits. I screamed at them, clamped my hands over my ears, but the whispers only grew stronger. Day 7. I don't know how I'm writing this. My fingers are numb, and the world keeps fading in and out. Last night they came. The figures stepped from the trees, dozens of them, surrounding the camp. They stood there, silent, faceless shadows against the snow. The humming was deafening, vibrating through my skull. One of them moved closer, its body bent in jerks, like a puppet pulled by tangled strings. It stopped just feet from me, and I swear I could feel the cold radiating off like fire in reverse. It reached out a hand, long, pale, dripping with river water, and when its fingers brushed my cheek, I felt something inside me unravel. I ran. God help me. I ran through the forest, branches tearing at my face, snow filling my boots, until I collapsed at the riverbank. The ice had broken open. The water churned black and endless, and beneath it, I saw them. Faces, hundreds of them, staring up at me with pale, empty eyes. They were waiting, and now I understand. Pete isn't coming back. The valley doesn't let people leave. It keeps them. The voices are louder now. I'm so tired. The cold doesn't hurt anymore. I think I'll rest by the river, just for a moment. If anyone finds this journal, don't stay. Don't listen. Don't look too long into the ice. Alaska doesn't want you here. They say the cold out here can drive a person mad. I always thought that was just something people in the lower 48 like to tell themselves, as if Alaska was some mythic wilderness, too harsh for human beings to truly endure. But now I know, the cold isn't what makes you lose your mind. It's what lives in it. I came north in February, the worst time of year to test yourself against the Alaskan bush. I was part of a research team studying permafrost melt near Nome, though in truth, it was just me and one other guy, Miller. The rest of the crew had been delayed by weather, and the higher-ups told us to get started without them. Miller was a decent man, but we weren't friends. He was quiet, practical, the kind of guy who knew how to fix a snowmobile with duct tape and frozen spit. I, on the other hand, was a note-taker, the recorder, the scientist who believed every question had an answer if you wrote it down carefully enough. The first 2 days went fine. We set up camp, ran our drills, took soil cores. It was brutally cold, but the sky was clear, and at night the aurora painted the heavens green and violet. I thought I'd never seen anything so beautiful. On the 3rd day, Miller found something. He came back from a scouting trip pale and tight-lipped. "You should see this," he said. We snowshoed about half a mile north until he pointed at the ground. Tracks. Not bear, not moose, not wolf. They were long strides, wide set, sinking deep into the snow. But the strangest part was the shape. Almost human, but stretched, elongated, with only 3-toe marks splaying outward. They went on for a good 100 yards before vanishing into a patch of ice. What do you think? Miller asked. I wanted to say prank, or misprint in the snow, or anything logical, but the words died in my throat. Maybe melting, I muttered. The sun reshaped them. But Miller just looked at me, eyes dark. Sun hasn't touched the snow in weeks. That night, I woke to a noise. Not the wind, not the groan of ice shifting. It was closer. At first it sounded like someone humming, low and steady, almost like a lullaby. Then it broke into something sharper, like bones clicking together. I froze in my sleeping bag, every hair on my body rising. The sound circled our tent, slow, deliberate. I whispered Miller's name. No answer. I turned to look, and his cot was empty. I found him at dawn. He was standing at the edge of the camp, staring north, his parka unzipped, frost clinging to his beard. His eyes were wide, unblinking. Miller, I said softly, what the hell are you doing? He didn't answer, just raised his hand and pointed. Out across the snowfield, maybe 200 yards away, stood a figure. Tall, wrong. Its limbs too long, its head bowed low, like it was sniffing the air. Even from that distance, I felt its gaze slide into me like an icicle. I blinked and it was gone. Miller swore he saw it walk away, but I didn't believe him. I couldn't believe him. On the 5th day, a storm rolled in. Wind shrieked like an animal, and the snow came sideways, cutting visibility to nothing. We stumbled trying to secure the tents, but one ripped clean from the ground and vanished into the white. That's when Miller shouted, "There!" Through the blizzard, a shape loomed, a structure. We staggered toward it, half blind, until we reached an old trapper's cabin leaning in the snow. Inside it was dark but shelter. Dust lay thick on the floor, and animal pelts hung stiff and gray along the walls. A pot rusted on the stove. No sign of recent life, but there was something carved into wood above the doorframe. A circle, split down the middle with jagged lines. Miller stared at it too long. You know what this is? He asked. No, I said, and I didn't want to. That night, I woke again, this time to a smell. Rot, sweet and cloying, like spoiled meat left too long in the sun. I sat up and gagged, covering my nose. The smell seemed to seep from the cracks in the cabin walls, from the floorboards, from everywhere. And then came the scratching. Slow at first, then faster, frantic. Nails dragging across wood. Something moving under the floor. Miller grabbed his rifle and aimed at the boards. It's underneath us, he whispered. I wanted to tell him not to shoot. That firing blind was insane, but then the floor bulged. Just slightly. Enough to see the powdery snow sift upward through the cracks. We didn't sleep again. The storm passed, but Miller was worse. He didn't speak much, only stare at the tree-line with those wide, cracked eyes. By then I was hearing it too. Whispers in the wind. Not words at first, just shapes of words, broken syllables, pulling at the edge of my mind. But soon they grew clearer. Hungry, cold, join. I tried stuffing snow in my ears, wrapping my head in my parka, but the voices slipped through anyway. That night, I dreamed of the river, except it wasn't water beneath the ice. It was eyes, hundreds of them, staring up, unblinking, waiting. On the 7th morning, I woke to silence. Miller's cot was empty again, his rifle gone. I stumbled outside, panic already tearing through me. The snow around the cabin was churned with tracks, his boots heading north, and alongside them, prints, the same long, 3-toed shapes. I followed. God help me, I followed. For 2 miles I trudged through waist-deep snow, the tracks winding into a frozen ravine. The air grew thick, heavy, and the whispers roared in my head until I nearly screamed. Then I saw it. Miller. He stood in the center of the ravine, motionless, rifle dangling at his side. Across from him was the figure. Tall, twisted, limbs too long, too many joints. Its skin pale and stretched thin like parchment. Miller lifted the rifle. I thought he would shoot. Instead, he dropped it, and then he walked forward, straight into its arms. The figure bent low, almost tender, and wrapped him in its limbs. Then, with a sound like cracking ice, both of them sank into the snow and were gone. I don't know how I made it back to the cabin. The whispers haven't stopped. They're louder now, inside me, pressing against the walls of my skull. Sometimes I think I hear Miller's voice among them. It tells me things. That the cold is only the beginning. That the snow remembers everyone who dies here. That the thing in the ravine isn't one, but many, waiting beneath the ice for the living to stumble close enough. I tried to pray, but the words froze on my lips. The tracks are outside again, circling the cabin. Dozens of them. The oil from my lantern is nearly gone. The cold doesn't feel cold anymore. It feels like part of me. I know what's coming. I know what waits in the snow. If someone finds his journal, don't follow the tracks. Don't listen to the whispers. Leave this place to the dead it keeps. Because Alaska isn't empty. It's full, and the snow is always hungry. When people imagine Alaska, they think of beauty. Towering peaks, endless glaciers, and skies that dance with green fire. But beauty here is just a mask, and I learned too late what hides underneath it. I was part of a 4-man team sent to document an abandoned Cold War radar station deep in the Brooks Range. The place had been shut down for decades, but the government wanted photographs and samples, checking for contamination, that kind of thing. It was supposed to be simple. Fly in, spend a week cataloging, then fly out. The pilot dropped us near a frozen river, and the mountains rose all around like jagged teeth. From the air, the station had looked like a cluster of small gray buildings hunched against the snow. Up close, it was worse. Rust had eaten through the steel walls, and antenna towers sagged like broken bones. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. No wind, no shifting ice, no animal calls. Just silence, so thick it pressed against your ears. By the second day, things started to feel wrong. We found the barracks first. The bunks were still there, mattresses shredded by time and mice. But on the walls, carved deep into metal with knives, were words. Dozens of them. Some in English, some in Russian, some in languages none of us recognized. Most of them repeated the same phrase. Don't listen to the white. One of my teammates, Harris, laughed nervously. Cold War paranoia, he said. They probably went stir-crazy. But when I ran my fingers over the carvings, I noticed something that turned my stomach. The letters were scored deep, deeper than any knife could reasonably go into steel, as if whoever wrote them had all the time in the world, or was entirely human. That night, I couldn't sleep. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was full of whispers, low and shapeless, pressing against the edge of my mind. I lay there with my eyes wide open, telling myself it was wind, except there was no wind. On the third day, we lost one of us. Carter went out early, camera in hand, saying he wanted to get shots of the antenna towers in the morning light. Hours passed, and he didn't come back. We searched until dusk, calling his name into the white vastness, but there were no tracks leading away from the station. None. It was as if he'd stepped off the earth. That night, the whispers were louder, clearer. I thought I heard Carter's voice among them, begging us to come outside. Harris almost did. He stood at the door in his boots, hand on the latch, mumbling Carter's name like he was in a trance. It took both me and the last teammate, Walker, to drag him back. He fought us, eyes wild, shouting that Carter was freezing out there. But when I looked into the darkness beyond the door, I swore I saw a figure standing far off in the snow. Too tall, too thin, watching. By the fourth day, we were falling apart. Walker wouldn't stop pacing, muttering about getting out, about how the pilot wasn't coming back. Harris refused to eat. I tried to keep notes, to ground myself in the habit of observation, but the words on the page began to twist, letters reshaping themselves when I blinked. The whispers never stopped. Sometimes they sounded like my own voice, sometimes like my mother's. Sometimes, like all of us, speaking in unison. That evening, Harris vanished. One moment he was lying on his bunk, eyes closed. The next, his blanket was empty. No sound, no trace. Walker broke down after that. He screamed at the walls, fired his rifle at shadows that weren't there, then locked himself in a storage room. I pounded on the door, begging him not to be alone, but he only shouted back, "It comes for us when we're together. Don't you see? It only wants groups." Hours later, the screaming stopped. By day 5, it was just me. The station felt alive now, every corridor groaning like a throat. I wandered to the halls, too afraid to stop, afraid of what the silence would say if I stayed still. That's when I found the control room. The old consoles were covered in dust, lights long dead, but the big radar screen, the heart of the station, was on, faint green glow, static lines. And on the screen, a single shape moving slowly toward the center. I told myself it was a malfunction, ghost signal. But the closer the dot came, the louder the whispers grew, until my ears throbbed with them. I don't know how long I sat there, watching it move closer and closer. Maybe hours, maybe days. Time didn't work right anymore. The last night, I woke to find the whispers inside the room with me. Not outside, not beyond the walls. Inside, the air shimmered like heat rising from asphalt. The shape appeared in the corner, tall, pale, featureless, limbs too long, head bent sideways, as if it couldn't quite fit in the human world. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whispers filled my skull until there was no room for my own thoughts. It reached out, fingers like icicles, and touched my forehead. For a moment, I saw everything. The snowfields, endless and alive. The faces of those who had vanished, not gone but absorbed. The truth, Alaska wasn't empty. The white wasn't silence. It was hunger, and it wanted me too. I don't remember leaving the station. I woke miles away, half buried in snow, my notebook frozen to my chest. No footprints around me. No sign of pursuit. The pilot found me 3 days later. He said I was lucky, said the others must have gotten lost in the storm. But I know the truth. The white doesn't let go. It keeps you. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers, calling me back. When I first agreed to work in Alaska, I thought it would be nothing more than a quiet seasonal job, a chance to get away from the noise of the city. A remote lodge had hired me as a caretaker for the winter, promising good pay and the kind of solitude I thought I craved. The brochure showed a rustic cabin surrounded by endless forest and mountains glazed in white. It seemed peaceful, even idyllic. But if I had known what that place held, I never would have stepped foot on the bush plane that carried me there. The pilot was a quiet man with weather-beaten skin. He didn't make small talk, just kept his eyes fixed on the frozen horizon as the tiny aircraft cut across the sky. When the lodge finally appeared below us, tucked between a frozen lake and a wall of black pines, he frowned and muttered something under his breath that I couldn't catch. I asked him to repeat himself, but he only shook his head. The first thing I noticed when I stepped out was the silence. The kind of silence so complete it pressed against your ears, making you feel like you were underwater. No birds, no wind, just the crunch of snow under my boots. The lodge itself was bigger than I expected, built of heavy logs, its windows staring out over the lake like dark, empty eyes. The pilot helped me unload my supplies, then turned to me with a look that made my stomach twist. "Stay inside at night," he said flatly, "and whatever you hear out there, don't answer it." Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, his plane vanishing into gray sky, until even its engine faded. The first few days passed without much trouble. I busied myself chopping firewood, checking the generator, and keeping the lodge in order. At night, I read books by lantern light or listened to the faint hum of the radio. But there was something about the air, something heavy, oppressive, that kept me uneasy. I would wake in the middle of the night certain I had heard footsteps crunching across the snow outside, but whenever I peered through the frosted window, there was nothing. By the end of the first week, I noticed the tracks. They weren't animal tracks. They were too large, too human, and they circled the lodge in wide loops. At first I thought maybe hunters or locals had wandered by, but the snow was untouched for miles in every direction. These prints led out of the tree line and back into it, as if something had been watching me. One evening, just after the sun had sunk below the trees, I heard it, a voice, faint but clear, calling my name. My blood froze. I rushed to the window and looked out, but the world was empty, washed in pale moonlight. The voice came again, closer this time, soft, almost gentle. "Come outside." The pilot's words echoed in my head. "Whatever you hear out there, don't answer it." I sat by the fire with my hands shaking, the sound of my name drifting through the night until it finally stopped. The next morning, I found fresh prints in the snow, leading right up to the door. Sleep became impossible. Every night, the voice returned. Sometimes it sounded like my mother, other times like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. Once, it even sounded like my own voice, pleading to be let inside. The worst part was how badly I wanted to believe it. The loneliness out there gnawed at me, and whoever, or whatever, was calling seemed to know exactly how to dig into my head. By the third week, the generator started failing. The lights would flicker and die, plunging the lodge into a suffocating blackness. I had candles, but their glow only made the shadows seem deeper. On one of those nights, while fumbling with the radio, I caught a burst of static, followed by a voice that wasn't a voice at all. It was a chorus, 100 whispers overlapping into something broken and wrong. Through the distortion, I thought I heard one clear word: hungry. I stopped using the radio after that. The days grew shorter, the nights longer, and my sense of reality started to bend. I would glimpse movement in the trees, a tall, dark figure slipping between the trunks. Once, I saw a pale face staring at me from the other side of the frozen lake. Too far to make out details, but its stillness, its patience, chilled me more than the cold ever could. Then came the knocking, soft at first, just a tap against the door. I tried to ignore it, but it grew louder, insistent, until it sounded like fists hammering on the wood. When I dared to look, the door was trembling in its frame, though it never broke open. The next morning, there were bloody handprints smeared across the porch, too large to be human. I thought about leaving, but the lake was frozen solid, and the forest stretched for endless miles. Without the pilot, I was trapped. The realization sank into me like ice water. If I stayed, I wasn't sure I'd survive the winter. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. The voice outside was sobbing now, begging me to open the door, and against all reason I found myself reaching for the latch. My hand shook violently, torn between fear and a desperate need to make the loneliness stop. Just before I touched it, the sobbing stopped. Silence fell, heavy and complete. Then, a whisper right on the other side of the door. "I can see you." I stumbled back, knocking over a chair, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The door rattled once, twice, then everything went still again. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. My body was wasting away, and my mind felt like it was unraveling. I stopped keeping track of the days. The firewood dwindled, the food supplies shrank, and still the presence outside never left. The last entry in the lodge's old logbook caught my one night. It was dated almost 50 years earlier, written in a shaky hand. It waits in the dark. It wears the voices of the ones you love. Don't listen. Don't open the door. When you hear it close, It is already inside. That was 3 nights ago. I don't know how much longer I can last. The whispers are inside the walls now, slipping through the cracks, curling into my ears as I try to breathe. Sometimes I see shadows moving across the floor, though nothing stands in front of the fire. Last night, I woke to find the door wide open, snow blowing across the threshold. I don't remember opening it. I don't remember dreaming either, but there were footprints leading from the forest to my bed and then back out again. I'm writing this now in case someone finds it, in case I don't make it through the night. My hands are shaking so badly I can barely hold a pen. The voice is calling again, closer than ever. It sounds just like me. I never believed in the stories the locals told me. They called it the white silence, not just the way snow swallowed every sound, but for something older, something they claimed lived in the untouched wilderness. I thought it was superstition, a way to scare newcomers like me. I came to Alaska in December, a seasonal hire with a small research team tracking wolf populations. I wasn't a scientist, just a field hand, but the pay was good, and I crave adventure. We set up camp near the base of the Brooks Range, far from any road or town. The snow was endless, a white desert stretching the horizon, broken only by dark pines and mountains like jagged teeth. There were 5 of us. Dr. Adler, the lead biologist, Marcus, his assistant, Ruth, a tough woman who handled logistics, Darren, our cook and medic, and me, the rookie. We had snowmobiles, tents, and enough supplies to last 3 months. The first 2 weeks went smoothly. We tracked wolves, tagged prints, and documented kills. But then the animals disappeared. Not just wolves, everything. No rabbit tracks, no moose droppings, no crows. The woods went empty, as if something had wiped the land clean. One night, while the others slept, I stepped outside to relieve myself. The cold bit through my parka, my breath hanging like smoke. That's when I heard it. Not wolves, not wind. It was a long, low moan rolling across the snow. It didn't sound human, but it didn't sound like an animal either. It vibrated in my chest, an unnatural frequency that left my teeth aching. I stood frozen, listening, until Ruth unzipped her tent behind me and hissed, "Get inside. Now!" The next morning, I asked her what it was. She didn't look up from her coffee. "Don't talk about it," she said flatly. After that, everything changed. At night, we started hearing things circling the tents. Footsteps crunching in the snow, slow and deliberate. Sometimes, the zipper would twitch as if something was brushing against it. Darren swore he saw a shadow pass across the firelight, tall and thin, but Adler dismissed it as nerves. Then Marcus went missing. He'd gone out with me to set a trail camera. I was 10 feet away when he screamed. I spun around, but he was gone, just gone. His footprints led across the snow and then stopped, like he'd been plucked into the sky. We searched for hours, shouting his name, but there was nothing. That night we heard him. His voice came from the tree line, calling for help. Ruth held me back when I tried to run toward it. "That's not him," she whispered. But it sounded exactly like him. Same tone, same panic. Then the voice changed. It stretched, warped, until it was a chorus of voices overlapping, male and female, young and old, all calling at once. We stayed awake until dawn, huddled in the tent with the fire dying between us. Nobody spoke. The days blurred together after that. None of us ate much. Adler scribbled notes in his journal, muttering to himself about frequencies and predators. Darren started praying under his breath. Ruth kept her rifle close, always loaded. 2 nights later, Darren vanished too. One moment he was by the fire, the next he wasn't. We found his boots still sitting by the flames, his footprints leading out into the snow. The tracks went for maybe 30 yards before they ended abruptly, just like Marcus's. That night, we heard Darren's voice, and Marcus's, and dozens more we didn't recognize. They surrounded the camp, whispering, laughing, crying. The snow reflected the moonlight so brightly it almost glowed, but we saw nothing moving, just endless white. I stopped sleeping after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt watched. Sometimes I dreamed of standing in the snow, naked, while something tall and faceless loomed over me. I would wake drenched in sweat, certain I'd heard breathing inside the tent. Ruth lasted the longest. She refused to leave the fire, refused to go anywhere alone. But one morning, Adler and I woke to find her rifle lying in the snow outside camp. No sign of her. No footprints this time. Just a rifle, half buried in frost. Now it was just me and Adler. He was unraveling fast. He'd stopped eating entirely, muttering about resonance and voices in the silence. I caught him standing barefoot in the snow once, staring into the trees. When I dragged him back, he fought me like a wild animal. On the 12th night after Marcus vanished, Adler was gone too. He left his journal behind. I read it by lantern light, my hand shaking. Most of it was nonsense. Numbers, sketches of strange elongated figures, strings of words that made no sense. But the last entry chilled me to the bone. It doesn't kill. It takes. It wears the ones it takes. If you hear your name in the white silence, it's already too late. That was 3 days ago. Now I'm alone. The food is gone. The fuel is gone. The snowmobiles won't start. Last night, I heard them again. All of them. Marcus, Darren, Ruth, Adler, my mother's voice, my father's, friends I haven't seen in years. They were right outside the tent, whispering my name in unison. Tonight, I can hear them breathing inside. If someone finds this notebook, know this. The white silence isn't empty. It's alive. It's hungry. And it wants me next. The lantern is dying. The whispering is louder. I think I see something moving in the corner of the tent. It looks like me. Thank you for watching. But remember, the darkness doesn't end when the story does. If you're brave enough, subscribe for more tales from another world where nightmares never sleep.